Hey guys, welcome back. So this is actually going to be the first official Pokemon video on this channel. Now I've brought up Pokemon up on several different videos, but those videos were not inherently about Pokemon. So yeah, anyways, to start things off, why not talk about one of the most problematic topics among Pokemon discourse, and that's the state of its games. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Now, the Pokemon games have been one of the most important forms of media to me for years now. The earliest game I remember playing is Leaf Green from the Game Boy Advance SP. Ever since then, I have made it a point to make sure to play every single Pokemon generation that's been released. Every single one was enjoyable till Generation 7. That's when things started to get somewhat different. Now, granted, some may say Generation 6 is where things started to get off track and deviate from how the first 5 generations were. And that definitely makes sense, especially since that was the generation that started 3D Pokemon games, and is when some may say the game started to get way too easy and began just giving players new rare Pokemon without any effort from the player. But honestly, given how enjoyable the story was and how great the game looked from the 3DS perspective, I still think it's a quality Pokemon game that's great. The game still maintained a lot of the magic and essence that made all previous Pokemon games a joyful experience. But all that changed from Generation 7, one I would still call the worst generation of Pokemon games. It was the first time I literally didn't enjoy a Pokemon game. I mean, honestly, it was weird. From playing these games for years, these games have always brought a level of enjoyment and a sense of adventure, but this game was pure annoyance and frustration. The tutorials and over guidance during the beginning portion of the game was unbearable, treating all players as if they were 5 years old, like they had never played any Pokemon game beforehand, completely robbing players of any sense of adventure. The new Pokemon designs had also been at its worst. The battles had seemingly gotten extremely easy to the point that any sense of a challenge had been completely dissipated. Gyms were completely gone, and the story had been reduced to mediocre nonsense. And despite all this, at the time, I had thought that this was maybe just a one-off terrible game, and that the next generation would be right back to being a great and enjoyable game. You know, everyone's entitled to one bad game, right? Damn. Was that the wrong line of thinking? Because unfortunately, this was actually the start of a new trend of bad Pokemon games, where the games would essentially follow the same characteristics of bad writing, multitudes of simplistic battles, overly linear progression of the story, and an over guidance from NPC characters. Add to that a lack of adventure. Honestly, how the hell did this happen? Well, honestly, it started all the way back from Generation 5. By the way, this generation next to Generation 4 are my all-time favorite Pokemon games, having by far the best and most nuanced story. The first 4 generations of the games, as heralded as those games are, generally follow a very similar formula in terms of story and progression. Earn 8 gym badges, defeat the evil team, become the champion of the region. Now, granted, Generation 5 doesn't stray too far away from that formula either, but what this generation does differently is that it poses more philosophical questions to the players about pre-established things among the Pokeverse, such as questioning the morality behind the practice of catching Pokemon. It attempted to create contemplation among the players and not just have said players continue on the same simplistic pathway from previous iterations. And this generation introduced characters who explored existentialism and finding their goals and purpose in the world, something many people can relate to. Bianca and Charon are probably the most well-written side characters for the protagonist. Despite all this, it seems like this generation was just one of those games that were quote-unquote way ahead of its time, as the generation has been adored now by the fandom, but at the time was met with mixed reviews, with one of the major complaints being that these games deviated way too much from the formulaic nature of the first 4 generations. Funny thing about that complaint is that now people complain about how the games are too formulaic. Anyways, the reason this is all brought up was because after the first 4 games were met with largely positive reviews, Generation 5 was the first that was met with a lukewarm reaction. And it's not a coincidence that when the most ambitious game was met with the most negative criticisms from the fan base, the studio would then subsequently respond by never making another game like Generation 5 again, choosing to not only return back to their formulaic nature, but make games even simpler and easier over time. Honestly, this has lowered the quality of games that had garnered massive amounts of positive equity over time. Yet despite all the declining satisfaction of these newer games, the Pokemon brand is massive enough that their games still tend to do very well whenever the next generation is made available. And that's just based off the sheer amount of people that go after these games and still enjoy their formulaic nature. We gotta remember that these companies are always going to try and protect their bottom line. And over the years, they have found a formula that certainly gets results, despite how dull the formula has gotten. This is the constant dance between corporations and creativity. These corporations tend to look for formulaic strategies to get the most out of their company by also providing the least amount of resources possible, which is usually the type of thing that destroys creativity. Creativity is not inherently formulaic. Now, granted, it sometimes can be formulaic, but generally speaking, creativity is much more unpredictable and wild, which can lead to massive greatness or failure. Now, after all this, what's the future of the Pokemon games looking like? And what does the fandom want the future of these games to actually look like? As a creative, I have a tendency to always lean towards risk-taking and being brash and taking chances. That's the environment that cultivates growth and innovation. And fortunately, it does seem like the company is taking more chances to appease the concerns of the fan base. We wanted open world, we got it, somewhat. We wanted a revamped battle system that was not the same turn-based battle system, and we kinda got that too. Sorta, kinda. Not really, but it is different. We did get a new type of story, such as the one that was featured in the Legend of Arceus series. And hopefully there's more Legend series about other regions moving forward. Look, it's not perfect, right? But at least the company's trying something different. We all know plenty of gaming studios that sit on their hands and don't do anything despite the constant uproar from their fan base to do something differently. Am I excited for Generation 10? Not really. Maybe the games have just passed me by. But at the end of the day, as someone who has been a fan for 20 years at this point, we gotta hope the franchise revolutionizes the games to more modern gaming and creates a new foundation for tomorrow's Pokemon games. How's that gonna be? How's it gonna look like? I have no clue. We're just gonna have to wait and see. Thanks again for watching, everyone. I really do appreciate checking out the whole video. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe as well. And also post all your thoughts and comments down below. Anyways, take care. See you on the next video.